Hey, well, good morning. What a beautiful, beautiful spring weekend. And Aaron Buer is going to be opening the scriptures for us today. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank him publicly for a couple things. Generally, when Aaron speaks, I'm not in the building or even in this part of the country. And so this is a rare occasion for me actually to be in the room when he's here. And so real quick, Aaron, how many years with Ada Bible Church?
10 years now.
10 years. All right. You graduated from high school in the area?
Yep, Caledonia High School. Fighting Scots.
Fighting Scots,
Yes,
all right.
Absolutely.
And then moved down Chicago area to attend
Yeah, Moody Bible Institute.
Moody Bible Institute. All right, you had a birthday this year.
I did.
You turned?
Well, I'm trying to, 40. I was trying to keep it quiet, but whatever.
Yeah. He just looks like he's a 10th grader, so. And I don't, you know. So married with children.
That's right. I've been married to my wife, Katie, for 16 years, I think. And 5 kids, ages 3
Married,
to 13.
you think, or
no,
16
definitely,
years?
Definitely married.
Yeah,
The
length,
time, anyway.
Children.
Yes, I got 5 of them.
Ages?
3 to 13.
3 to 13.
Yeah.
All right. Now, it just seems like a handful to me.
It is.
Aaron serves as our director of our middle school and high school ministry. It's called Lifeline. And it runs at each campus, and there's a couple staff at each campus. Imagine a couple hundred volunteers. Yeah. And between middle school and high school, each week, we have in actual attendance like around 800 of our students actually present. But if you were to collect all those that are involved who can't make it because of sports or events or whatever, probably north of 1,500 middle schoolers and high schoolers. So it's a big job, and it's a heavy weight that Aaron carries to direct that and be responsible for that ministry and all the staff and volunteers and our students. But in addition to that, Aaron is taking an increasing role in our weekend teaching ministry. I generally teach in the neighborhood of probably 33 weekends a year, give or take. And this year, Aaron is scheduled to take, I think about a dozen or so of the weekends that I'm not preaching. And so apart from me, Aaron will be our most consistent communicator here at Ada Bible Church. And so this is my opportunity, dude, just to thank you for your faithfulness, for your consistency. Thank you for the way you serve our students, but also thank you for the way that you so faithfully and consistently study and prepare and bring God's word to us. So can you take the opportunity just to say thanks with me? So good to be here. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much. It is such a privilege for me to be part of this church. I love this church, and a privilege for me as well to open the scriptures with all of you. I just love it, and so thank you so much. We're jumping into part 5 of a series called Correcting Spiritual Drift, and I want to begin our time with a question. And the question is, have you ever made a significant career change? So I know that some of you have gone from like full-time employment to stay-at-home mom or dad. Anybody done this? Yeah, very different experience, right? Different expectations, demands, a lot less sleep, things like that. And some of you I know have transitioned recently from full-time students to part-time or full-time employment. Again, different type of deal, different schedule, different expectations for your life. And I wonder if any of you have ever made a transition from one type of career to another type of career. So this is something that I experienced in my early 20s. So I'd like to introduce you to 22-year-old Aaron, the water well driller. Yes, this is me in the dead of winter, and let me just show you one more picture to show you how much I loved this job. I mean, look at that smile. I'm not sure I've ever been happier in my life than in this, apparently, looking at the picture. But when I was about 23, if I remember right, I transitioned from water well drilling, which was like the family business and what I had grown up with, to youth ministry, to becoming a youth pastor. And I gotta tell you, it felt like a dramatic change for me. A lot of stuff changed, and it wasn't very long until I realized that this new job, this new career, came with a whole new set of demands on my life. So a lot changed. For example, this is not what you wear as a youth pastor typically, although working with middle school, you might want to keep the hard hat. I'm just saying. But the truth is, on the way to my first interview at a church, I had to stop and buy khakis. I mean, that's how not business casual ready I was. So, one of the changing expectations, new demands is I needed some new clothes. As a water well driller, I had one set of skills. I had to learn how to drive a big truck. I had to learn what all these different levers do and why. And as you hang on to this cable, what you feel tells you like what kind of soil you're in, whether it's clay or sand or rock. I had to learn all these skills. And pretty much none of them translated to being a youth pastor. I had to learn a bunch of new skills, how to study and communicate the scriptures, how to talk to students, how to counsel students and their parents, a totally new set of skills. And then there's the industry jargon. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff like this well drilling rig here, it's called a sputter rig. And this thing over here, that's a cat head. And this here, that's a slide hammer. Stuff that you probably don't care about, but it's the jargon of the industry. And when I became a youth pastor, I had to learn a totally new jargon. And you might be thinking like, well, what jargon? The words that your teenagers use that you have no idea what they're talking about. That's what I had to learn. And so I want to just take a second. This is totally unrelated to the sermon, but I want to teach you some words that teenagers use because maybe your son or daughter or grandchild or whatever, look, this is my gift to you, okay? So a couple words, here we go. Lit. Lit means incredible or amazing. Has nothing to do with fire, or if you're of an older generation, it does not mean that you drank too much. Now, some of you just breathed a huge sigh of relief because last Friday, your son came home and said, that party was lit. And you said, oh no, Billy's drinking. He's not. It was just incredible or amazing. So there you go, my gift to you. Another phrase here, throwing shade. Nothing to do with sunlight or shadows. It means that you're insulting somebody. You're putting somebody down. You're throwing shade on them. Here's one more, ready? Spilling tea. Yes. If your teenage daughter or 20-something daughter bursts through the door and says, I need to spill some major tea, you don't need a paper towel. You just need to sit there because she is going to tell you about her social life. You are going to learn. So this is my gift to you this morning, totally unrelated from the sermon. And here's a little gift. Don't try to use these words or phrases. Because if you do, you will get the most severe of eye rolls. It will not work. But what I'm trying to say is transitioning from one career to another, I mean, it brought a whole new set of demands. It felt like everything was changing, and maybe you can relate. But you might be wondering, like, what does this have to do with this sermon series? I mean, what's going on? Well, here's the deal. Week 5 of Correcting Spiritual Drift, we've been following the nation of Israel, God's people. They're going through a time of significant spiritual drift. Their king Ahab, their queen Jezebel, these monarchs are leading the people away from the worship of Yahweh, who is the God of Israel, and to worship the gods of the neighboring countries, specifically Baal. And this is Jezebel's favorite god. And what's happening is we've been following one specific character named Elisha, and he is Elijah. I'm gonna do this a couple times, just hang in. Elijah, who is God's prophet, and he has been calling the people back to faithfully worshiping God. But now we're at a transition point because the last 4 weeks have been about Elijah, and the next 4 weeks are about Elisha. And I already made the mistake of calling the one guy the wrong name, and I'm gonna do that about 4 or 5 more times because the names are just too similar. So please give me some grace. But we're at a transition point because Elijah, if you were with us last week, he was in a tough spot. He was depressed. He was ready to give up on this whole mission that God had given him. And he traveled down to this place called Mount Horeb, and God met him there. And he encouraged him, and he refreshed him, and he gave him what he needed to get him back to work. And so God gave Elijah some instructions, and this is what we find here in 1 Kings chapter 19. The Lord said to him, that's Elijah, go back the way that you came and anoint Elisha. son of Shaphat from Avel Mahola. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I think that's how you say this town. Anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. And so we're at this transition point between Elijah and Elisha. And Elijah, he listens to the word of the Lord, and he does exactly what God instructs him to do. He leaves Mount Horeb. He travels back to the nation of Israel, to the hometown of Elisha, and he finds him there in a field. And so we read these words. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah finds Elisha doing what he's always done, plowing, because he's a farmer. And he's probably doing what his dad did before him and what his dad's dad did before that. I mean, they're farmers. This is what they do. But Elijah shows up in the field, and now everything is about to change. We read these words. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. And as I read this story, he throws his cloak and just keeps walking. It's like a drive-by cloaking or something. And it's like, okay, what just happened? What's he doing? Is Elisha cold? I mean, no, the cloak, or sometimes is called a mantle. It's kind of this hairy animal skin cloak thing that you throw over your shoulders. It's very important. It's symbolic. It symbolizes Elijah's prophetic ministry. It symbolizes his call from God to be a prophet. And so when he throws it over the shoulders of Elisha, what he's saying is, Elisha, I'm calling you to follow me and become a prophet. You're not a farmer anymore, you're a prophet. And so now Elisha has a decision to make. And what Elisha is going to come to understand, and what we're going to see, is that this call to follow comes with some significant demands on his life. Now, you might be thinking, cool story, never been called to follow after a prophet and probably never will be. So how does this relate? Well, here's the deal. You and I, we're not called to be prophets, but we are called to follow Jesus. Jesus is calling each and every one of us to become his disciple, which is a word that means apprentice learner, to become like him. And as I read this story about Elisha being called to follow Elijah and the demands that come on his life, I see parallels to our call to follow Jesus. And so what we're going to do is we're going to explore Elisha's experience and jump into his journey. And as we do, we're going to discover 4 demands that fall on our lives as we seek to follow Jesus. But before we jump into the story, I just need to say 2 things, because I think there's some stuff that you're already feeling. And the first has to do with jobs. I've already referenced 2 job transitions, from water well driller to pastor, and it's kind of like from something that's not that spiritual to something that's spiritual, and farming, which not that spiritual, to prophet, which feels very spiritual. And I just need you to know right here out of the gates that the point I am not making is that if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to get serious about your faith with Jesus, then you need to get a more spiritual job. That is not what I want to say. In fact, I'm hoping that through the course of this conversation, what will become clear is that whatever you do and whatever work you are involved in, it already is very spiritual. And so I just want to be clear about that up front. Secondly, you may have noticed I used the word demands. And you might already be putting up some walls and hold on, that just sounds like a lot. Well, here's the deal. I chose that word on purpose because I believe it is true that the call to follow Jesus comes with significant demands. And this conversation will be a tough conversation. It's going to be a challenging conversation, and we're going to enter into some uncomfortable space. But here's the deal. I believe that there is incredible potential for spiritual movement in this conversation. And I believe there is an opportunity in this conversation for real spiritual growth in our relationship with Jesus. And so my hope for you even though this will be a tough conversation, is that you would open your heart to what God would do in your life through this conversation. So let's jump back into the story. We left Elisha, hands on the plow, cloak over his shoulders, going, what just happened? And so the question is, what is this guy gonna do? He's just been called to become a prophet. How is he gonna respond? Let's check it out. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. He runs after him, but then asks to say goodbye to his parents, to kiss his parents goodbye. What is this? Is he hesitating? Is he not sure about this big decision? Is he stalling? I don't think so. I think he is appropriately and respectfully closing one chapter of his life so that he can open a new chapter of his life. You see, in the ancient Near East, family was like everything. I mean, your number one priority in life would be the well-being, would be the honor of your family. And Elisha recognizes, look, if I follow after this Elijah guy, this is gonna cause a major shift in my priorities. I mean, this is gonna impact my work. This is gonna impact my family. This is gonna impact my relationship with my village. This is big. And so the call to follow, it comes with some demands. And the first of those demands that we're gonna talk about today is my priorities. The call to follow will require a shift in my priorities. And Elisha just recognizes, look, now if I follow this guy, Elijah calls all the shots. It's like where Elijah wants to go, what Elijah wants to eat, who Elijah wants to hang out with. That's what I'm gonna do because he will become the priority. This will cause a major shift in my priorities. Now, to help us kind of illustrate this idea, I wanna take you to an experience that I had a couple weeks ago. Here at the Cascade campus, it was a baptism service. And one of the best things about baptism services here at our church is that you get to hear the stories of people who are being baptized. You get to hear how God is transforming their lives and causing them to grow and change in their lives. And so I wanna share with you part of a story of a young man who was baptized a couple weeks ago here at the Cascade campus. I'm just gonna read you part of this story. He said, my whole life, I have mainly had one big routine. Go to school every weekday, go to soccer on Tuesday and Thursday, have games on Saturday, church on Sunday. I always had a routine. I was always so focused on getting good grades and doing well in sports. Church was just part of my routine, not my top priority. I've wanted to change that for a while now. I don't want it to just be part of my schedule. I want it to be something deeper. I want my faith to be the schedule. I want my life to revolve around God and my faith in him. I mean, here's a young man that understands what it looks like to shift your priorities around Jesus. I want to read this again. I want my faith to be the schedule, and I want my life to revolve around God and my faith in him. How old do you think this young man is? Take a guess. Let me introduce you to Jaden. He's 12. Here's a 12-year-old kid who wants his life to revolve around his Savior. Isn't that amazing? And it is true that sometimes the 12-year-old kid gets to be the teacher of all of us. And I gotta tell you, we have some amazing young people in our church who are giving their lives to Jesus and allowing God to transform their lives, and it is just really cool to see. But his language, I think, captures this idea. He wants Jesus to be the big priority around which the other priorities in his life spin. That church, that soccer, that school, that his friendships, they would revolve around the big priority, that is Jesus. That Jesus would be the thing that all the other things spin around. This is what it looks like to allow God to shift our priorities so that he becomes the center of everything. And so a question I have for you, do you need to make a shift in your priorities? I mean, is a faith that doesn't impact your priorities really a faith worth having? Is a faith that only lives on Sundays really a faith that's worth having? Do you need to shift your priorities today? And what would it look like to invite Jesus to have influence and authority, not just on Sunday, but all the other days of the week? That you would invite him into school on Monday, that you would invite him into the staff meeting on Tuesday, that you would invite him into the budget conversation with your spouse on Thursday, that you would invite him into your entertainment plans on Friday. Do you need to make a shift in your priorities? That your faith in Jesus would set the schedule, as Jaden said, that all the other priorities would revolve around the big priority, which is your faith in Jesus. You see, the call to follow comes with some demands, and one of those demands is over our priorities, and Jesus desires that we shift our priorities around his authority. So Elisha shows up in the field, drive-by cloaking. Elisha runs after him and says, hey, I want to go say goodbye to mom and dad. Now, if you've been journeying with us through this series, you know that Elijah, this dude is hardcore. I mean, he lives in caves and ravines. He's had confrontations with kings and queens. Just a little while ago, he went toe-to-toe by himself against like 400 prophets of Baal and came out on top. This dude is hardcore. And now Elisha's like, I want to go say goodbye to mom and dad. How's he going to respond to this? How is he going to respond? Let's check it out. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? Okay, I want to point out all this living in caves and living alone might be affecting Elijah's social skills. Drive-by cloaking, what did I do? What is he saying here? What is he saying? I think what he's saying is, I didn't choose you. I didn't pick you. Bring it up with God. He's the one that chose you. And then he just keeps walking. So now here's Elisha. What do I do with this? So let's see how he responds. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. And he burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. He kills his cows and burns his plows. And if you think that's a great line, I stole it from a pastor in North Carolina. Sometimes you just can't improve on things. He kills his cows, burns his plows. I mean, what is he doing? Is he trying to impress the grizzled old prophet? Like, well, I'll show him, I'm just burn everything. I'll kill it. No, I don't think that's what's happening. What's he doing? Why does he do this? I think he realizes that God has called him to be a prophet. He's not a farmer anymore. He's a prophet. God has called him to a new identity. And he's cutting ties with his old identity and making sure that there's nothing to go back to. You see, the call to follow, it comes with some demands, and one of those demands has to do with my identity. It has to do with our sense of identity, and understand that Jesus has something important to say about my identity. Because through what he accomplished, through his death on a cross and his resurrection, there are some things that are true about you and about me if we have embraced that gift of his death on our behalf. We're forgiven. Because of his death, everything that we've ever done is clean, washed away. We are forgiven. And we're holy, which means that when God looks at us, he doesn't see our imperfections, he doesn't see our failures, he sees the perfection of his Son. You are holy, and you are loved. And do you know that God adopted you into his family? and he calls you son, and he calls you daughter. You are a treasured daughter or son of the King. You are loved. And in Christ, this is your identity. You're not who you were. And so why do we keep going back to that old identity? You see, some of us need to burn a plow. We're keeping stuff around in our lives that reminds us, tempts us back to the behaviors and thought patterns of that old way, that old identity before Jesus. It's like when we get bored or lonely or discouraged, we look out back and we see that old plow. And it just tempts us back to life before Jesus, back to that old identity. Some of us need to burn a plow. And so I wonder, is there a plow that you need to burn? Is there something that's got to go in your life if you are going to embrace this new identity that Jesus purchased for you? And I wonder what that plow is. Maybe it's access to something, a substance, images, videos that belong back there in that old identity, but they do not belong in that new identity that Jesus purchased for you. I wonder what that plow is for you. Maybe it's a place. It's like every time you go to that place, just bad things happen. Stuff that belongs in that old identity, not the new one. Maybe it's a person. I mean, you need to block this person's contact. You need to unfollow them on Instagram. It's just not doing you any good. Maybe it's a group of people that when you hang out with them, it's like this gravitational pull back to the old identity. Maybe it's just something you're holding on to. A grudge, a bitterness, unwillingness to forgive something. I wonder what that plow is for you, but I'm telling you, some of us need to burn a plow today. Cut ties. Make sure there's nothing to go back to. I mean, some of us just need to say, I'm done with this. This is it. I am done. I am not going back there anymore. And I'm telling you, this could be the day that you would look back on years from now and say, that was the day that I walked away from it. That's the day that I burned it. That's the day that I cut ties with that old identity. That could be today. Some of us need to burn a plow. And yet, as I challenge you with these words, I know that some of us would just say, yeah, I tried. And then I tried again. And I tried again, and I just somehow keep coming back to that thing. I don't know how to beat it. It feels too big. It feels too heavy. You have no idea how much I've tried. And there's a reason for that. Because some plows can't be burned alone. And it might just be true that you're not going to get out of this one on your own. You see, there's a detail that we jumped over in that previous verse. I want to show it to you again. Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen, he slaughtered them, he burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. There's this community thing that's happening here. He kills his cows and turns them into this, a whole lot of steak. I mean, 2 cows worth of steak, that's a lot of meat, right? That's a lot of steaks. And then we read that he fed them to the people. What people? Who's there? Well, at the very beginning of the story, we read that Elisha was plowing with 1 yoke of oxen, and then there was 12 others. I think this field that they're working in is like the village field. It's like a communal farming deal. They all are in on this together. And so Elisha, he slaughters his cows, he's cooking up steaks, and he invites the village, he invites his community into this important event in his life. He invites them to participate as he goes public with his decision to follow. and with his new identity. He invites his community into his journey. You see, the call to follow comes with some demands. And the third of these demands has something to do with my community. It has to do with my willingness to open up to my community, to be real, to be authentic with my community, my willingness to invite my community into my journey. This is really important because some plows can't be burned alone. And so what's the significance of this whole thing for Elisha and his village? Well, let me ask you a question. What would happen if 2 months down the road, Elisha shows back up in town and he's trying to buy a secondhand plow, he's trying to get some used oxen, he wants to get back in the farming game? What are those people who are eating steaks at this party, what are they gonna say to him? Dude, what are you doing here? Elisha, you don't belong here. You're not a farmer anymore, you are a prophet. And what we're talking about here is the power of community in the form of accountability. He has invited them into his journey, and now they have the authority to say, yeah, no, you don't belong here. You're not a farmer anymore. And why is this important? Because some plows can't be burned alone. This thing that you're dealing with, you might not get out of that on your own. What is needed is community. What is needed is accountability. You've got to invite the community of Jesus into your journey if you want to get to the other side of this thing, because some plows can't be burned alone. And I just know that for so many of us, and I think this is just an American culture thing, that we're trying to follow Jesus alone. And I just need to tell you that following Jesus is a team sport. I don't know if you knew that. It's like Jesus returned to heaven and he gave us the church, the community of his people, the collection, the assembly of Jesus' people. We need each other. It is a team sport because some plows can't be burned alone. Now, here's the good thing. If there's something that you're wrestling with, realizing, man, I need to get this thing out of my life, but I just don't know how. Many of us are already connected into community here at our church because you're involved in some ministry or other. For example, if you're a student, maybe you're involved in Lifeline. Well, could I challenge you? Whatever it is that you're wrestling with in these moments, your Lifeline leader, your small group leader, maybe it's time to open up to them. And I'm not talking about telling the whole group. I'm not talking about telling the whole village necessarily, but 1, 2, 3 people that you really trust, that have proven themselves as trustworthy, as mature, as Jesus followers. Maybe it's time to invite them into your journey. Others of you are involved in our young adults ministry, union, or women's ministry, men's ministry. Maybe it's time to share with your leader, with a staff member. They would love to listen to you, to encourage you, to help you. And others of us, maybe you're brand new at Ada or just disconnected for whatever reason, and you know there's something you need to deal with, but you're not exactly sure who to trust with it. Can I offer a suggestion? Our campus pastors in this church, these guys are gold. I mean, they are solid dudes at each and every one of our campuses. I would go to them with stuff in my own life. I would recommend my friends to that. I think these guys are great. And if you don't know where else to turn, I would start with a conversation with your campus pastor. They can listen, they can point you in the direction. I really believe that they can help. And so here's the deal. I want to put a number on the screen. And if you want some help, if you want a conversation, text HELP, and then the campus that you're attending, or if you're watching online, just HELP online. We'll get you connected with one of our campus pastors. And here's the deal. I don't want to embarrass anybody and make anybody, feel like they're the only one with their phone out. So everybody pull your phone out, okay? Everybody plays along. And here's the deal. Either text that number with help in the campus, or text somebody that should be here and tell them, this sermon is lit, you should be here. Do that. Nobody needs to be singled out. Here's the thing. I want you to be free. Jesus gave his life so that you could be free. But so often we don't experience the freedom until we invite the community of Jesus into our lives, into our journey, into our story. Because some plows can't be burned alone. And so I would plead with you to open up to somebody trustworthy, because you're not going to get out of this on your own. So Elijah shows up in the field. He calls Elisha to follow, and Elisha begins to realize this is going to come with some significant demands over my priorities, my identity, my community, and my relationship with them. But now he's ready to go. I mean, he's ready to follow and become a prophet. And so we read these words, then he set out to follow Elijah and became a famous prophet. I mean, he's hearing the voice of the Lord and sharing it with the people. He's performing powerful miracles. He's having confrontations with pagan kings and queens. He becomes a famous prophet. That's actually not what it says. I made that up. This is what it says. He set out to follow Elijah and he became his servant. That's not nearly as exciting, is it? It's like, whoa, time out. I thought the cloak, that was like I thought you called me to be a prophet. Like, servant? What's this about? Okay, so probably there's like a training period. I mean, prophet, that's kind of like a high-level deal, right? Like the listening to the voice of God and performing miracles. There's a learning curve, an onboarding type deal. Okay, I get. So what are we talking, like 6 months, a year maybe? How long are we talking that Elisha was Elijah's servant? How about a decade? Yes. One scholar even said 18 years Elisha served as Elijah's servant. I thought you called me to be a prophet. A decade? Wow. I mean, what was it like? What kind of stuff did he do as his servant? Well, we get this story from after Elijah left the scene. This is a whole other story where God shows up with some fiery chariots and takes him up to heaven. Don't have time for it. But after that point, we get this story about the king of Judah and the king of Israel. They team up in this war against one of the neighboring countries, and they're trying to surprise attack. So they go the back door, they go through the desert, but small problem, they get turned around, they're lost, and they run out of water. They're really in trouble. And the king of Judah, guy by the name of Jehoshaphat, says, hey, isn't there some prophet of the Lord that we can consult? And then one of the king of Israel's servants is like, oh yeah, there's that guy Elisha, and look at how he describes him. Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here, and he used to, pour water on the hands of Elijah. Now, just an observation, you don't get the international reputation of being the guy who pours water if you did it once or twice. It means you did it for a decade, right? Hey, Elisha, so you're following Elijah, you become like this prophet in training, what's your title over there? Water pourer? Really? I mean, what kind of stuff do you do? Well, I pour the water so Elijah can wash his hands. It's very serious work. Would you do it? 12, 18 years of pouring the water over his hands? I thought you called me to be a prophet. Okay, so maybe like the serving thing, it's the pathway to greatness, right? It's preparation for greatness. Because truly, Elisha will become a famous prophet. He will perform mighty miracles and hear the voice of God and share it with the people. So maybe it's just like preparation for that greatness. Is that what this is? I'm not so sure. I think that the serving and the pouring water actually is greatness. And the reason that I think that is a story in the Gospels about Jesus and his disciples. So fast forward the story a couple hundred years, and Jesus' disciples are in this huge argument over who's the most important and who gets the most important spots in Jesus' coming kingdom. And they're arguing, and Jesus is like, time out, you guys don't get it. And Jesus says to them, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And then he goes on to say that the Son of Man, which is a title he used for himself, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And understand that Jesus came from the highest position of greatness and lowered himself and gave his life away. He said, if you want to be great, be like me. And then not long after that conversation, we find Jesus in the last meal that he will share with his disciples. And what's he doing? He's pouring water over their feet. He's washing their feet, the most menial and low of tasks that only a servant or a slave would do. And Jesus is doing this for his disciples. And he says, if you want to be great, be like me and serve. And I just get this sense that maybe Elisha was most like Jesus in those years that he was pouring water over the hands of Elijah. Even more so than those powerful days of miracles and prophetic sayings, because he was acting like Jesus. You see, the call to follow comes with some demands, and the very last one, the fourth one, is a demand on my heart. Because Jesus desires to transform my heart, to make me more like him, that I would be a servant, that I would be willing to pour water over the hands of the people around me. And something that I've come to understand is that if serving others is not a big part of your pursuit of Jesus, you're doing it wrong. Because Jesus called us to serve, and serving is the essence of greatness. And all this brings me back to 22-year-old Aaron drilling wells in the dead of winter. And I got to tell you, there were days that what I did was shovel sand and clay and mud into a wheelbarrow, push that wheelbarrow across somebody's yard to a field or a woods and dump it, turn around and wheel it back, shovel it full again, wheel it back to that field and dump it, and do this over and over and over and over for like 8, 10, 12 hours. And it was hard work, and it felt menial. It felt bottom rung of the totem pole. And I remember thinking on days like that, man, I want to do something that matters. I want to do something significant. I want to do something great for God. And here I am shoveling mud. But you know what? Based on what I've learned about life and about following Jesus, I'd like to go back and have a conversation with that 22-year-old version of myself and say, you think this doesn't matter? You think serving doesn't matter? I mean, you think wheeling this mud across this family's yard so they don't have to clean it all up for hours and hours, you think serving them in that way doesn't matter? And you think keeping this job site clean and orderly so your dad who's drilling can focus on his task of providing this family with good water, you think serving him in that way, you think that doesn't matter? It matters because it's serving. And serving is the essence of greatness, and Jesus called us to be like him, and Jesus became a servant and laid down his life for us. It matters. And so I just need to encourage you for a moment. For those of you who show up week after week, and through this winter, you plowed the parking lot, you shoveled the sidewalks, and you're part of the teams that clean the bathrooms and clean up the glitter bombs that take place in the Discovery Village rooms with our kids, and serve the cookies, serve the coffee. It matters. If you ever have moments where you think, man, maybe I should do like the more spiritual. No, it matters because it's serving. And you're serving the people of our church, and you're serving our guests. You're pouring water over their hands, and that matters. And I know that some of you are stuck at home as moms of little kids. And sometimes it feels menial and mundane, and it's like diapers, and then laundry, and then mac and cheese, and then nappers, and then more mac and cheese and diapers and laundry. And it's like over and over the same stuff. And you probably have thoughts where it's like, I want to do something that matters again. Can I encourage you? Pouring water over the hands of your kids and serving them in that way matters because you're acting like Jesus. And someday when you're in a different position, maybe you're back in the business world or whatever it is that you have dreams of doing, I hope that in that position, you're still willing to pour water over the hands of the people around you. Because greatness doesn't come in the position, it comes in how and why you do the work. It has to do with your heart. And those of you who are young professionals, and you're like bottom rung on the company or the firm or the organization, and it's like, I'm kind of sick of getting coffee for the executives and making copies. I want to do something that matters. Can I remind you that it's not about the position? That's not where greatness comes from. It's how you do the work and why. And I hope that when you get into that position, that you're still willing to pour water over the hands of the people around you and serve them. Because Jesus said, serving is greatness. And so the call to follow, we're not called to be prophets, but we are called to follow Jesus. And it comes with some demands. Demands over our priorities, our identity, our community, and our hearts. Because God desires to transform our hearts. And my hope and my prayer for you today, for this week, is that you would be willing to surrender more and more of these areas to the authority of Jesus. And that as you do, that you would experience joy and peace and freedom in your pursuit of him. I would love to pray for you as we close. God, thanks for this time. And thanks for your scriptures. I love these stories that reveal your character and at the same time function like a mirror to show us ourselves. God, it can be so challenging to hear your scriptures. And I just recognize that some of us here today have been deeply challenged with something in our lives that needs to go. God, would you give us the courage? Would you surround us with trustworthy, good people who can help us carry this load and move away from this old stuff? God, we love you. We appreciate you. And so we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being here this weekend. We'll see you next time.